Hi, everyone. As David said, I'm Allison, or Alli. I always get confused about my own name because I switched it halfway through here. But this is my talk about how to learn technology while at a company. Because as basically all of us have been there, if you're not currently going through it, we constantly have to learn new things, and most of the time you're working for a company when you're doing that. I also modified all my slides like 30 minutes ago because I realized it was National Dog Day, so you get lots of pictures of my puppy. So why should you listen to me? Who am I? First of all, I'm from Ohio, which, as everyone knows, Midwesterners are really trustworthy. Just kidding, I gave this talk last in Ohio, and so I was like, break the ice, I'm from there too. I got my degree in computer science from the University of Illinois. I taught computer science for 2.5 years in Cameroon with the Peace Corps. And for the last 3 years, I've been at Eventbrite, where now I'm a senior software engineer. And none of that matters at all. None of that is why you should listen to me. You should maybe listen, because at each of those points, I had no idea what I was doing. So, why should you learn? To which you respond, what sort of programmer are you? Don't you know you have to constantly be learning? Our industry's always changing. It's like, yeah, I got it. But why does your company care? Why should you take the time, on your company's time, to learn new things? So we're going to go through some terminology. Bus factor is the rather morbid term for how many people need to get hit by a bus before your company doesn't work anymore. So ideally, you can have lots of people get hit by a bus. If you only have one person who knows your critical production technology and they get hit by a bus, you're kind of out of luck. So your company wants more people to know things. Second is unicorns, which is often used among hiring people and engineers to refer to people who know lots of different stuff, who know lots of different rare terminology or how to add GIFs to slides. Unicorns are often referred to as full stack, and full stack means different things to different people. It's usually people who know front end and back end, but these terms are kind of vague anyways and mean different things to different people. I started writing out at what point I learned different technologies, and all of this is things I've learned in the last couple of years at Eventbrite. But if you pay attention, you'll notice the first year I kind of only learned a couple things, and then you learn a couple more, and it looks really impressive, but if you break it out, it's like, okay, 3 things in a year, that's 4 months each. That's plenty of time. It's also really interesting because it means I went a whole year getting by without knowing all these things. And another thing to point out, I don't know any of this anymore. If Eventbrite suddenly needs to use OCaml. So how do you do it? How do you learn those new things? 1 every 4 months. So what I basically try to do is learn one thing at a time. Don't try to tackle everything you don't know at once. Secondary, always be learning something. If you're working on a project and there's 10 technologies you don't know, okay, break it down. Can you solve one of those first? Similarly, if you're constantly getting projects where you always know something, try and get different projects. Talk to your manager. It might be as simple as saying, hey, I'm really interested in learning React, and so I'd like to work on a project that we're doing that on. Don't be like my dog. A call out to managers, tech leads, senior engineers, old-timers, really anyone determining other people's schedule. A lot of this responsibility is on you. Pay attention to the projects you're giving people. Make sure they're learning new things. It's really boring to always be doing the same things over and over. So, how do you actually learn? When I was a teacher, I had to do all these pedagogy classes, And it kind of boils down to lots of different things, but because people like classifying other people, we like to break it into people who are visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learners. Sometimes it's debunked, but everyone kind of agrees that it's sort of okay. So you might recognize these terms. It's pretty common. You might also recognize yourself as one. And maybe you're a visual learner. This could mean the ways you learn best might be pair programming. It might be watching how somebody else solves it. It might be reading books. It might be watching seminars with like Udemy or Khan Academy. There's lots of different ones. With books, I have tons of textbooks. I love them, they're great. They hold up my desk. My roommate, on the other hand, I think buys a textbook once a month and actually reads it. So, to each their own. Auditory learners will learn really well by coming to talks and conferences and taking online classes, or by talking to people and having that physical one-on-one, hey, how do you use Marionette? If you're kinesthetic, most people are kinesthetic. This is definitely me. You will like to hack on projects. Maybe this means taking something on at work and solving it. Or maybe it means following a tutorial online. Maybe it means writing on Post-it notes or drawing things out on whiteboards. I used to have 2 monitors, and all my coworkers made fun of me because my second one was just a place to put my Post-it notes. So they let me duct tape a whiteboard to the wall after that. But the important thing is actually no one is a pure auditory learner or a pure kinesthetic learner. You use all of them. So figure out what works for you, figure out what strategies work, and use them. So if you're talking to people, and that's your thing, how do you find those people? Who do you talk to? The easiest way is to find somebody whose style complements your own. This might be somebody who loves to draw on whiteboards with you. It might be somebody who looks at your Post-it notes and is like, oh, these are totally in the wrong order. Like, let me rearrange them. Or maybe there's that one person, the only person in your company who knows that obscure technology. And they're really scary, and it looks like you shouldn't go and talk to them. But I've already told you that's exactly the person you should talk to, because if they get hit by a bus, it's really bad. So some strategies for approaching those people are to schedule time with them. Maybe they're really busy, but people can basically always take some time. If you point out what you've already figured out, say, hey, we have this bug that I'm trying to solve, and we're charging people $200 too much. And I really want to solve this because I'm an awesome person. And I found that this is where you start, and I can't figure out where it goes from here. That's a much easier place to start. And this person will be like, oh, they're trying to figure it out, they're cool, let me just point them out. And it's much easier. You can also say, hey, I'm helping you. Maybe you don't know SQL very well, and you're trying to figure out how to optimize a query. So you go to somebody, and you're like, hey, I noticed this service is really slow, and I'm trying to make it better, but I don't know how. Can you help me? And phrase it as, this is helping you, it's helping me, and I'll learn a lot, so it's great. So what should you work on? If you can push different things, maybe you have an extra hour and you want to learn Cassandra. How do you figure out what to work on? Do you just grep your code base for Cassandra and look at what's happening? You could, but you could also see what's really important to your company. Maybe there's an existing bug or an existing feature. Maybe it's a hackathon and you want to learn a new thing. What do you think would be important to your company? It's much more likely then to get used, and you're much more likely to get other people on board with helping you. And second, if you want to be really awesome, what do people at your company complain about? Is there a dev process that nobody can get working and nobody understands? Is there a table that doesn't work properly? Is there some other obscure code? Maybe if you dig into it, you can learn a whole lot. So you're learning tons of things now. How do you figure out what to work on at any given time? The most important thing, I think, is to time box. Don't spend a couple days trying to figure out how to use Cassandra. Maybe spend an hour working on it, and then go and talk to somebody, or go follow a tutorial, but give yourself a time limit. Prioritize is kind of self-explanatory, because maybe you have 10 things to learn. Do you have to learn them all right now? And this doesn't really fit in time management, but is my favorite technique, so I wanted to throw it in here somewhere. Whenever I take a break from my code, it was really hard to figure out where I was when you're context switching. So something I always do now is I leave a comment where I was. Maybe it's like, oh, this is what I was doing right now, and you leave. And then you come back, and it's a lot easier to get started again. So now that you know everything in the world, how do you remember it? And in the words of the best TV personality ever, write it down. This is basically what one of my walls looks like at a given moment. Take notes. When I first started here, I actually had this secret Word document, not Word, Google Docs. I have a Mac. But I would write down all the commands, or all the answers to the questions that I thought were really stupid. I would ask somebody, like, how do I get the dev environment working? I have no idea. And then I would write it down secretly in this little corner. And it took me about 6 months to realize that everyone had this document, and it wasn't embarrassing at all. So definitely take notes. Even better than writing notes for yourself that you're hiding in a corner with, document it. Document it for everyone else. If everyone's personal documents are looking the same, that means you probably need to work more on your company's documentation. And bug reports. If you're trying to get things set up and it's not working correctly, and it takes you 5 hours to figure out that you're missing an install of something, it probably means there's either a bug in the process or it needs to get documented. So don't just say, oh, I solved it for myself, great, I'll move on. Help the next person. If you haven't realized already by how my slides look, I really like lists. At any given point, I usually have at least 2 lists. I like to have one that's saying what I've learned or what I've done, and another one that says what I want to learn. So I'll go through and write down, hey, today I figured out how to do this thing. And it's great because you can look at it in the future and be like, oh, right, that's how you do that thing. It's start of documentation for the next person who has to learn. It makes you feel kind of awesome, because you might have fixed bugs all week and been like, oh man, I've done nothing. And then you look at your list and you're like, no, I'm pretty awesome. And it also really helps when you're tackling an entire mound of things that you don't know to look back at what you've done. You can say, oh, that list is like really long of the stuff I do know. Okay, it's fine that I don't know Go. And then what you want to learn. Something that I have trouble with often is going into the rabbit hole, saying, okay, there's this new thing and it's really cool, and I'm learning it. And oh, this other article is about something related and it seems really cool too. You probably don't need to do all of it at once, especially if you're trying to finish a product or feature at your company. So I tend to write those things on another list. Say, hey, I want to follow up with this later. There's a really cool article, I'll look into it later. And then maybe sometimes you'll run into an issue that solves. And you're like, oh, right, I wanted to look into this. But it has multiple reasons to do that. And finally, probably what's most important is to teach. Teaching is the best way to remember things. It's also a really great way for me, at least, because sometimes when I learn things, it's not actually accurate. And I'm like, no, it's fine, it's close enough. But then if I'm telling somebody else, I have to figure out if it's true or not, because I never want to tell somebody else that it's something that's wrong, and then they go and tell everyone else that Alli taught them it, and it's totally wrong. So I make sure I know what I'm talking about, and then I tell them. And people who have just learned something are actually the best people to teach other people. Because if you're talking to experts all the time, they've often forgotten the introduction things. They've forgotten that some obscure terminology isn't normal for everyone to use. They've forgotten how to set up their dev environment. But if somebody did that last week, it's fresh in their minds. So it helps everyone for those people to tell more. So what's really important is there's lots of ways to learn. Figure out what works for you. Find people that you can talk to. Find people that work in similar ways to you. Take the time to do it. It's really helpful to everyone. It's really important for you. And have fun. Hopefully we're all in this industry because learning is fun, because there's lots of cool things to do. There's crazy things that we can do with it. So don't forget, in the abyss of things that you can learn, that you're doing this for fun. And I absolutely want to know what works for you. Is all of this totally wrong? Do you have some awesome strategies? Every time I give this talk, going back to teaching people, I want to be correct, and I want to be able to help people. So tell me what works for you. Tell me what's wrong. Everything, thrill me. I'd love it. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Rommel. I do a program where we provide free tech training for women, and they always ask me, what should I start with? So do you have a recommendation or a suggestion for getting women started in tech?
This isn't a women-specific thing. I started, I think, with Visual Basic in high school, which is totally not useful at all. So I would recommend actually JavaScript as a really great way. I love it because there's not an environment that you need to set up. Any browser, you can start programming with JavaScript. So it's a really low barrier to entry, and it's really useful. We love JavaScript engineers. We're hiring.
I'll ask Alli, what's your list of things that you just learned and what is on your list of things to learn?
Ooh. So Kevin asked me what are things that I just learned and what are things on my list to learn. So I'm constantly trying to get better at Solar. It's something that I've been progressing with. I've recently learned a lot more about Docker. What is next on my list? Mostly actually trying to be a better mentor, which isn't directly a technical skill, but still definitely something that I can get better with and I'm learning.
I have a question. So once you have the list of things to follow up on, how do you actually make sure to look at that list every now and then and not just keep adding to it and, you know?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I actually find that I keep repeating things on the list. So as soon as I have something repeated, I try and go look into it. So it might be, hey, figure out how to make a SQL query faster. And I'll be like, okay, I can do that later. And then I'll run into it again a couple weeks later. Be like, oh, wait, no, that's really important, so I should address that.
Thanks for your presentation. Actually, I'm from Korea, and then my major is not that related about software, but after I come to San Francisco, I realized that engineer make a new build, and now I start learning basic software. But do you think how long time we need to work as an engineer?
It's a loaded question.
As I know, Bootstrap, they plan 3 months for learning, for teaching basic programming.
It probably depends how many things you're trying to learn, how many things you're trying to get done at once. There's companies who believe in committing on your first day. We have designers who commit code. So I don't think there's a number of months that makes you capable. And it's definitely, I think, something that you can learn one thing very quickly and then learn another thing very quickly. So it's a constant progression.
Hey, Alli, so what has your manager done? What has your manager done specifically to help facilitate all of this?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially for all managers, because it's great. One thing that I tried to point out before is he's given me projects that stretch my technical capabilities. and encouraged me to do that if I have an interest in, actually something that I was doing recently was Impala queries. And I didn't know how to do that, and I said, hey, we need this to get done, so how about I do it instead of giving it to another engineer? And he facilitated that and said, you have the time to do it, it's totally fine. I think that's one of the most important things, and also just recognizing that people are learning and maybe they didn't commit code for a couple days. And hey, you learned this entirely new thing. That's okay, that's great, good job, that sort of thing.
All right.
Great, thank you.
Let's hear it for Alli.